Have you ever seen a mob boss swinging like a maniac at his own reflection, only to be turned into a human sieve by a hail of bullets a second later? Today, we are talking about four men. Men who once made the entire city of New York tremble with a snap of their fingers. Each of them held the power of life and death over countless souls. But in the end, their downfalls were more pathetic and more absurd than you could ever imagine. New York City, 1957, early morning. The thick fog on the streets of Manhattan has not quite cleared yet. The air in the barber shop is heavy with the scent of cheap shaving cream. The most ruthless hitman in Mafia history died without ever seeing the faces of his killers. Spending his final minute on Earth, boxing his own shadow in a mirror. Before we dive into these four legends, we have to talk about that insane era. America in the 1920s and 30s. Prohibition was like a wildfire, igniting the greed of the entire underworld. New York's sewers did not run with rain. They ran with whiskey. A police badge was as worthless as scrap metal in the face of cash. Every street corner could be hiding a Thompson submachine gun. The sound, nicknamed the Chicago typewriter, was the theme song of the mob's world. In that steam-filled, blood-soaked New York, the Mafia were not the gentlemen you see in movies. They were a pack of wolves, looking for a throat to rip out. They wore the finest silk suits, smoked the most expensive Havana cigars, and owned the flashiest restaurants and secret speakeasies. But if you looked closely, you would see the paranoia behind their eyes. Because in the world of the Mafia, the word brother was just a placeholder for betrayal. Loyalty only lasted until the price for treason was high enough. Power is like a shot of pure morphine. Once you get a taste of being on top, there is no turning back. Every boss knew deep down that their throne was sitting on a mountain of dynamite. The only question was whose fuse was the shortest, and whose powder was the most explosive. First on our list is that poor soul we mentioned earlier in the barber chair, Albert Anastasia. In the New York underworld of that time, they called him the Lord High Executioner, or simply, the Mad Hatter. Those nicknames alone tell you how unhinged this man was. He was not just a boss, he was the founder of the most terrifying hit squad in history. Known as Murder Inc., essentially the Mafia's private slaughterhouse. Anastasia was the lead butcher. If the Mafia High Council decided you had to go, Albert and his boys would make you disappear, in the cleanest, most permanent way possible. During his reign, the entire New York waterfront was under his thumb. He did not need a reason to kill. Sometimes it was just because he was in a bad mood, or he did not like the color of a soldier's tie. He once ordered a hit in broad daylight, simply because he saw a random civilian on TV testifying. That kind of mindless violence and unpredictability, it really makes you think. He secured his seat as the head of the Gambino crime family. In those days, the Gambinos were the kings of New York, with more money than they could possibly count. Imagine a man who could nod his head and have someone at the bottom of the Hudson River the next morning. That was Anastasia's power. But he made the three fatal mistakes of a mob boss. First, he became uncontrollable, constantly ignoring the commission's orders and acting on his own. Second, he started selling Mafia memberships like they were coupons. If you had the cash, he did not care if you were a low-life or a thief. In the old-school Italian mob, that was the ultimate sin. Third, he developed a gambling addiction he could not afford, piling up a mountain of debt he could never pay back. To get the cash, he started breaking every unwritten rule in the book. This terrified his underboss Carlo Gambino, a man they called the Shadow. Gambino was quiet, acting like a humble accountant, but his mind was sharper than a razor. He realized that if they kept following Anastasia, the whole family was headed for a graveyard. So Gambino met with another power-hungry shark, Vito Genovese. In a smoky back room, they signed the executioner's death warrant. October 25, 1957. The fog was still heavy over Manhattan. Anastasia walked into the barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel. He did not bring any bodyguards. He was too arrogant for that. He thought he was untouchable in this city. He sat down in that red leather chair. The barber wrapped a white towel around his neck and placed a steaming hot cloth over his face. Just as Anastasia closed his eyes for a moment of peace, two masked gunmen burst through the door. The barber hit the floor, shaking. The gunmen did not say a word. They just started unloading their revolvers into the man in the chair. What happened next was pure chaos. Blinded by the hot towel and screaming in pain, Anastasia lunged out of the chair. He could not see the exit or his killers. He charged straight at the massive mirror in front of him. He thought his own reflection was the assassin. He spent his final seconds of life punching glass, fighting his own shadow, while the real killer stood behind him, coolly putting a bullet in the back of his head. The man who spent a lifetime dealing death died in a pile of broken glass, never even seeing the face of the man who sold him out. It was the ultimate irony. If you rule by the sword, the world will make sure you die by something much more absurd. Now, let us get into some real history. People ask why the hit happened in a barbershop. Because back then, it was the only place a boss was vulnerable. You have to close your eyes, and you have to put your throat in the barber's hands. If you think Anastasia's death was a movie, wait until you hear about the man who came before him. The man whose death ended an entire era. Giuseppe Masseria, better known as Joe the Boss. In the late 1920s, Joe was the undisputed king of New York. He represented the mustache PTs, the old-school mob, men who only trusted blood relatives and fellow villagers. They barely spoke a word of English, only Italian dialects. Joe owned the illegal booze trade during Prohibition, making money faster than the government could print it. But Joe was greedy and stuck in the past. He wanted to be the boss of all bosses. And that ego sparked the Castellamarese War. It turned New York into a literal slaughterhouse. Every morning, the street cleaners would find bodies, riddled with bullets, next to the trash cans. Joe thought he was winning, but he did not realize the world was changing. The younger generation was tired of the mindless killing. Leading the pack was his own protege, Lucky Luciano. Luciano realized the old ways were dead. The mob needed to run, like a Wall Street corporation. To get peace and take the throne, Luciano made a deal with the devil. He sat down with Joe's rival, Salvatore Maranzano. The deal was simple: kill Joe the boss and the war ends. They picked the hit for an afternoon at the Nuova Villa Tomorrow, Joe's favorite spot in Coney Island, mainly because he loved their seafood pasta. April 15, 1931, a lazy afternoon with the sun hitting the wine glasses. Joe was playing cards with Luciano, laughing over a plate of empty shells. Joe was in a great mood, talking about splitting up the city. Suddenly, Luciano stands up and says, "Hey, my stomach is killing me. I gotta hit the restroom. Watch my cards, and do not peek." Joe just laughed and waved him off. He did not know those were the last words he would ever hear. The second Luciano stepped into the bathroom, 4 gunmen burst through the door. The air in the restaurant froze. Joe did not even have time to put down his hand before they opened fire. The sound of the shots shattered the plates on the table. When the smoke cleared, Joe was slumped over the table, clutching the ace of spades in his hand, the death card. The king of New York died in a pile of pasta, killed by the man he treated like a son. Luciano walked out of the bathroom, acting shocked. He even sighed over the body while calling the cops. Talk about a cold-blooded performance. And get this, one of the getaway drivers outside was none other than Bugsy Siegel. The story goes that another hitman, Ciro Terranova, the Artichoke King, was so rattled, he could not even start the car. His hands were shaking so hard. Bugsy Siegel had to shove him aside and take the wheel himself. Just goes to show, even the toughest guys can lose their cool. Joe's death ended the era of the mustache PTs. But a new, more clinical era was beginning. The man who took over was Salvatore Maranzano. He won the war, but he did not learn the lesson. Maranzano crowned himself Capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. He demanded every family leader kneel to him and pay a massive tribute. He rented a luxury office in the New York Central Building and dressed like a Roman dictator. His hero was Julius Caesar. His office was filled with statues and books on the Roman Empire. He told his men he was building a new Rome. He forgot that Caesar ended up with a dozen knives in his back. Luciano was not about to be anyone's puppet. He saw that Maranzano was too arrogant and too racist to let the mob grow. Maranzano forbid his men from working with Jews or the Irish. To a businessman like Luciano, that was just bad for the bottom line. So Luciano decided to strike first again. He knew Maranzano was paranoid and surrounded by guards. A direct assault was impossible, so he hired hitmen to pose as IRS agents. They walked right into the building with fake badges. Since the IRS had just put Al Capone away, the mob guards were terrified of them. They let the agents walk straight into Maranzano's office. The boss of bosses was looking at a map, thinking the government was finally coming for his taxes. Before he could even offer a bribe, the assassins revealed their true faces. They used knives to stab him repeatedly, because Luciano had ordered them to make him suffer. Then, they finished him off with bullets. The man who dreamed of being Caesar died at the peak of his ambition. His death ended the era of the one-man dictatorship. Luciano created the Commission, the Mafia's version of a parliament, turning street gangs into a global conglomerate. But the final man we need to talk about was the wildest and most handsome of them all, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. If you have ever been to Las Vegas, you need to remember this name, because he built that miracle in the desert with his own hands. Bugsy was a movie star in a mobster's body. He hung out with Hollywood royalty. but his blood was pure violence. He was a founding member of Murder Inc. He would walk into a rival's house alone, with a machine gun. That kind of insanity made Luciano love him. He sent Bugsy to the West Coast to expand, and Bugsy saw the future in a patch of dirt in Nevada. He decided to build the most luxurious hotel in the world, the Flamingo, named after his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, because she had long legs like a flamingo. But Bugsy was a perfectionist, and he was reckless. The cost of the hotel spiraled out of control, from $1 million to $6 million. The mob bosses back east started to sweat. They suspected Bugsy was skimming the cash for himself. He was using family money to buy jewelry for his mistress. And in the mafia that hits the most sensitive nerve of all, money. Even though he was Luciano's old friend, even though he was a war hero of the streets, in the face of profit, friendship meant nothing. June 20th, 1947, a quiet night in Beverly Hills. Bugsy was sitting on the white sofa in his mansion, reading the next day's edition of the Los Angeles Times. The living room was warm and bright, but death was waiting in the shadows outside. The assassin used a high-powered military rifle. The first bullet shattered the window glass and tore right through Bugsy's skull. The impact was so violent that one of his eyes was popped clean out of its socket. Landing on the Persian rug across the room, the man who dreamed of ruling the desert died before he could ever see his dream come true. Vegas grew out of the sand because of him, but he was not there to see the lights turn on. The downfalls of these four men, Anastasia in the barber chair, Masseria at the dinner table, Maranzano in his high-rise office, and Bugsy on his sofa. They all thought they were the kings of the world, but in the end, the violence they dealt out came right back for them. That is the Mafia's code. You pay the piper eventually. It is not just a legend, it is the cold logic of the underworld. Did you notice the common thread here, behind every one of these hits? There was one name in the shadows, Lucky Luciano. He killed the old bosses and his old friends to build a secret empire that lasted 100 years. He was the one who really won the game, but how did he survive? And how did he run the Allied invasion of Italy from a prison cell? If you want to hear the legend of Lucky Luciano, drop a comment below and let me know. If this video gets enough love, I will drop the full story on the man who outplayed them all. Who do you think had the most pathetic ending? Let me know in the comments, and I will be jumping in to reply. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest corners. I will see you in the next one.